Mike Lessiter here, editor and publisher of Farm Equipment Magazine, and it's our great pleasure to have Jonathan Pellegrin with us today, who is the genius and brilliance behind Johnson Hill Press, who really got this thing going in the 1960s. So thank you for joining us, Jonathan. I think what I'd like to start with is for the younger viewers or listeners who might not know the history. Can you tell us a brief history of Johnson Hill Press and what you and your dad got started there, and where you took it before exiting the business and moving on to other things in the 90s?
Okay. My dad was a member of PCA. I think it was in the late 30s that the federal government started the farm credit system. And there were basically three branches. There was the Federal Intermediate Credit Bank that provided short and intermediate term credit to farmers. There was the Federal Land Bank Association that provided long-term mortgage financing to farmers. And then there was the Bank for Cooperatives that provided lending for cooperative banks or cooperative co-ops that provided services to farmers. So my dad had become a member. You know, that was kind of the beginning, and he thought that he saw a great future for production credit associations. And at the time, every single county in the United States was chartered to a given territory of a production credit association. And it was anywhere from the smallest geographic areas might have been 2, 3, 4 counties. And the largest ones were, maybe up to a dozen counties. And like banks, were only able to lend money as a proportion or in accordance with the amount of money they had on deposit. Production credit associations, I don't want to say that it was limitless, but it was nearly limitless. They were able to, the concept was so good, and they were able to get people to buy into the cooperative. And, that's how it got started. And,
okay.
Yeah.
So did he recognize a publishing opportunity?
He recognized the publishing opportunity. He had a very good friend of his was a guy by the name of John Strome, and he had been and Lee Schatz was a good friend of his. Do you know those names?
Yeah, I've met Lee a number of times. My dad, Frank, considers him his mentor in this business.
Oh, really? My dad said that Lee would die by an editor shooting him in the back. And did your dad ever allude to that?
No, but he trained my dad well, because the same red pen treatment that Lee taught him it still works around here too. So. Oh,
really?
They're similar that way. Yes.
So anyway, what happened was my dad was a farmer. He ended up with a lot of oats, and he said, "WTF? I mean, this is more oats than I'm ever going to need." And my mother helped him out, just as your mother has helped your father with his career. Mm-hmm. And he had a couple of good friends, and one good friend was a guy by the name of John Higgs, was an artist and had an apartment across the hall from our apartment in Racine. and they became good friends. And John had no agricultural background. I mean, he was like a city guy, and drove a big fancy car, but he didn't know anything. And Massey Ferguson was headquartered in Racine. Yeah, in Racine. And so he helped John Higgs form a publishing business around the structure of production credit associations.
Okay.
And I remember one year, whenever it was, there were 435 PCAs around the country, and their source of money was the Federal Land Bank, the Federal Intermediate Credit Banks, of which there were 12 scattered around the country, and they became the bank of discount for the production credit associations. And then John Strom had been an editor at Country Gentleman, and Lee Shantz also was employed by Country Gentleman. It was more due to John Strom. And you never met John, but
No.
You knew John lived in Woodstock, Illinois, and then he worked for the local newspaper. And he was an incredible photographer. I mean, a very talented photographer. And he was a very talented editor, but he didn't have the abrasive characteristics that Lee had. And so
He must have mellowed by the time I met him.
I'm sure he did.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I noticed, I bumped into him someplace. We were both at a snowmobile manufacturer, and I sold a lot of advertising to farm equipment dealers because it just fit. I mean, farmers had a lot of land, and they knew how to deal with internal combustion engines and yada yada yada. And it was recreation. It was fun, and I don't want to get too far afield, but all right. So my dad helped John Higgs get the magazine started and set it up as an independent publication. And Lee Shantz and John Strom and the people in that company, their idea was that they would go to the headquarters offices and sell the subscriptions, and that's pretty good. I mean, they get the mailing lists and they do it, and all they had to do is know something about agriculture, and particularly agricultural finance, and so that was the story.
Okay. And from there, the publishing entity, Johnson Hill Press, emerged out of that.
What happened was three of them were partners. Lee Shantz, John Strom, and my dad. And John Higgs was an art director, so he knew how to sell his services to agencies and so forth. But so my dad was in the bathroom one day when relieving himself, and one of the artists at the company walked in and said, "Hey George, what do you think of the new magazine?" And my dad knew there wasn't a new magazine, so he said, "Well, I like it just fine." I like it just fine. And then later on in the day, my dad went back to the office, and he saw all these flats, and it was the idea was that it was a weather guide, and then PCAs would send it out to their farmer members, and it would be focused content on weather, and that was it. And so then my dad, he was a pretty quick study. Well, he didn't have to be a quick study to figure this out, but they were screwing him. I mean, they were, starting a magazine that the three of them owned together. They were in partnership, and leaving him standing at the roadside, and that, I think that was a key point, and it wasn't getting off the ground in a big way, and so one day I think my dad went in and confronted John Strom and Lee Shantz. He was surprised about John Strom, just because John Strom, or my dad was bringing John Strom into those opportunities that John wouldn't have known about. And,
so is that what caused him to go off on his own then?
well, yeah, I mean, he was getting screwed. So my dad would go out on the road and he would call on PCAs, and he kept the sales program going. I mean, he drove a Ford Falcon and visited every single county in the country because that's where all the PCAs were.
And when he went full on as a publisher or printer, however you would characterize it, what year would that have been? When
they started PCA farming in 1957.
Okay.
And John Higgs started Farm Profit. Do you remember Farm Profit?
Yeah.
Did your dad work on that?
Yeah, I think right out of school or early 60s.
Yeah.
He did a stint there. Yeah.
We got Farm Profit away from whoever had it at the time. It was some people still kicking around from ag publishers, and like we did all publications, we localized for the dealers, and with Massey Ferguson, we devoted the back page to each individual dealer. And when we launched Farm Profit, or when we say relaunched Farm Profit, we visited every single Massey Ferguson dealer in the country, and our people carried cameras with them and took pictures, including Jim Rank.
I heard that.
This is a pretty good idea for Jim Rank to be able to get into farm equipment dealers all over the country and learn something, because otherwise he came out of the retail jewelry business, and
diamonds to dozer blades.
Pardon me?
He used to say he went from diamonds to dozer blades.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he was one of the most likable guys that ever, but he was a little bit weird, and you had him on your payroll, and
he personally taught me a great number of things about sales, because I was a true editor type before I had to get in sales when our guy had a heart attack. And so there wasn't much tutelage, but I think Jim found me a willing student. So he taught me what I knew, or what he knew, and I adapted it. So he was a sales mentor for me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I think the Cygnus the young people weren't listening to him, thought he was an old relic, a dinosaur. Yeah. And when we were working together, I needed his help, and I would ask him questions, and he loved to teach, but but I understand no one wanted to listen to him in Fort Atkinson. So
Yeah,
he was able to share with us in Brookfield.
yeah. No, I was happy to listen to him. I thought that he was a very disciplined guy, and he had the hang of what he had to do when he had a project that he knew where he had to go and how he had to connect the people, and
He was tenacious.
like you wouldn't have it. I mean, he was totally tenacious. And,
Yeah.